So we'll start in about a minute. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Stephen Katz, and I'm manager of the Global Data Use Conference. I work as a consultant for the Research and Impact Assessment Division here at IFAD. I'm honored to be the moderator for this roundtable on building a bridge between research and policy. I'm here with three prominent experts on this subject: Sara Savastano, Paul Winters, and Gero Carletto. Sara Savastano is the director of IFAD's Research and Impact Assessment Division. Prior to this, she worked at the World Bank as senior economist with the Development Economic Research Group, and before that as assistant professor of economics and finance at the University of Tor Vergata. Paul Winters is the Keough Hesburgh Professor of Global Affairs in the University of Notre Dame's Keough School of Global Affairs. His research and teaching focus on rural poverty and food insecurity, and the evaluation of policies and programs designed to address these issues. Prior to Notre Dame, he was the Associate Vice President, Strategy and Knowledge Department of IFAD, and Director of the Research and Impact Assessment Division, also at IFAD. Gero Carletto is Manager of the Data Production and Methods Unit in the Development Data Group at the World Bank. For more than a decade, he has led the Living Standards Measurement Survey, the longstanding flagship household survey program at the World Bank that is also an active part of the 50 by 2030 initiative. In 2015, he founded the Center for Development Data, a hub dedicated to fostering methodological innovation and strengthening capacity in the collection, dissemination, and use of survey data in low and middle income countries, which he directed until 2019. I will now pose a series of questions to these experts who will respond. Along the way, we will also take a poll with the audience to get a flavor of how you, the conference participants, also feel on the matter. This part of the program will go on for about 30 minutes, after which we will also take questions from the participants of the session. In this regard, you will note there is an Ask Question feature available to you at the bottom of the screen. You may pose your questions there throughout the next 30 minutes, but please do not use the chats for questions or the raise hand feature to post your questions. To better address the questions that may come up from the audience, a second moderator is also present here, Elizabeth Nderitu, an intern working with us at the 50 by 2030 initiative at IFAD, who will be watching out for the questions that come up through the Ask Question button, and if necessary, may group them by similarity, as we need to remain within 20 minutes, the 20 minutes that are available for the Q&A portion. So now that the format is explained, let's get started. A limited take-up of high-quality research. Limited take-up of high-quality research evidence by decision makers is often referred to as the gap between research and policy. Although this issue has been a matter of concern for some time, the gap between research and policy still remains without a fully connecting bridge. Our three experts will now probe into the various aspects of this troubling issue, providing answers to the questions I will now ask, following the 5 W's and an H methodology: why, who, what, when, where, and how. So let's kick off with the why question. Why a bridge? Assuming that decisions made about a program, practice, or policy should be grounded in the best available evidence, and that one of the key objectives of research is to increase and update the existing evidence base and to establish new facts and principles, research and policy should already be quite well suited for each other. Why then are the processes and activities associated with research and policy not in harmony and completely aligned? Why is there a need to build a solid bridge between research and policy? I open the floor to who would like to answer the first question? Sara.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ger and Paul, for participating to this session. Thank you to the data use team in IFAD for organizing this fantastic conference and very successful conference, and to the overall initiative for supporting this event. Why a bridge? Think of a language. A language, you need to learn the language, but then you need to use the language in order to communicate with people. It's the same between research and policy. First, you need to produce some research, but then you also need to use it. Those are two different activities. They also sometimes entail two different sides of the brain, if you want to think of it into neuroeconomics terms. Why a bridge? Because market, economies, countries are made of agent. An agent, they lie sometimes in two different sides of a broken bridge. Why? Because agent of research, agent of policy, they speak a different language. They stand in two separate sides of a broken bridge, and you need a third agent, a translator, that is able to bring what is produced by research, evidence, and data into the world of the decision maker. This is why you have a bridge, and this is why somebody has to accompany agent from the research side to the agent from the policy side. This is the reason why you need people to work together. We just finished, we're having a retreat here at IFAD with our department, and we had a session on working together. What does it mean working together? It means putting people with different background to work together and to produce an outcome which is larger than the sum of the part. And so when can you do that? When there is somebody who recognizes the importance of research, recognize the importance of evidence, recognize the importance of data, and put it in the hand of another group of people, the user of this evidence, in order to create, to design projects, program, policies and strategies that are aligned with the output of the research of the other side of the bridge. Over.
If I could just add to what Sarah's saying, I agree with what Sarah's saying, and I would probably take it even a step further. We have to be careful that we don't think that the research is just sitting there and it has to go to policymakers or vice versa, right? Part of it is also the need for a conversation. I also find, in my role at IFAD when I was there, I often found the research that was out there, which clearly I could understand, was not answering the questions I need to answer. So researchers weren't asking often the questions that were relevant for policymakers. And the only way they could know that, of course, is there's conversation, a bridge in which they're discussing things. I would say on the other side, a lot of the practitioners I worked with didn't understand research and the kind of questions that could be answered. And so it also requires that the practitioners, the policymakers, understand what research can do, what the value of data is, and ask the researchers the right questions. So the bridge is both for the transmission of information, but it's also for creating a conversation. And this is the role that Sarah talked about in the translators or knowledge brokers, whatever term you use. There are often people that are in a position that understand both, that can help facilitate the policymakers understanding what research can offer them, where they can use it for decisions and where they can't, and as well as the researchers to understand what kind of questions are relevant for those policymakers. So I think that bridge is a means of communication in a broad range of things that ultimately we hope will change the manner in which policymakers think of research, but also researchers think of pushing policies forward. Over.
Let me jump in with a couple of thoughts. So I must admit, I had a hard time preparing for this thing, not because I can't speak for 6 hours about the topic, but to think about what's new. What can I say of something new that hasn't been said? And that's where I kind of struggle a bit, because to me, for example, I think about the question why we need a bridge. I mean, just especially among ourselves, I think it is clear why we need a bridge. The question is, I would flip it around. It's like, why hasn't been built? Like, I mean, just and the thing is, being Sicilian, I've been thinking about the bridge over the between Italy and Sicily. That it's been 41 years of discussion. It hasn't been built. So why hasn't it been built? And if we want to understand what is the value of the bridge, we need to understand also why, what are the constraints and to me, you build a bridge if there are enough gains on both sides to use it and to cross it, right? So, because if not, you can build a bridge, it's still not gonna be used. So enough people want to cross this bridge, but also enough people want people crossing this bridge. So it boils down to demand. So is there demand for this bridge and how we build this demand? And also incentives, how we incentivize that people use the bridge, cross the bridge, and they build this, and the bridge is built. So thinking about how you create a demand. So this is something, again, nothing new here, and that's where I'm struggling. Where can I say something new? It's like, so how do you create this demand? So just to give an example of the LSMS ISA, when we started 12 years ago, there was no demand. There was no demand for panel, except a small group of academics. But we start anyway. Why? Because we created the supply that generate ultimately demand. So you just, you need to create the demand for this bridge, to use a bridge, what Sarah was saying. So it's not just that the bridge is the connector, but the people need to use it. People need to see a value in, and this is why it becomes important, not only to build the bridge, but to build the environment on both sides of the bridge. Because at the end of the day, and again, I'm sorry if I bring back the Sicilian bridge, it's like to build a bridge when there is no road on the other side. So it's very little use, right? So if the bridge ends up in a silo or ends up in a parking lot, there's not much use for that. So you need to build kind of the infrastructures on both sides of the bridge in addition to building the bridge. Over.
Thank you, Gero. I think your flipping of the problem brings us pretty nicely to the next question. Is okay? You need to have the demand. You need to create the demand, but what needs to happen? Who needs to do what? What pieces are in place? What's missing? What can be the role of the 50 by 2030 initiative to help facilitate? Who would like to take that first?
Sorry, Steve, because I wanted to reply to Gero. Can I start replying also to this question, because they're very much related? If you
Sure. No, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay, so Gero, crucial and very valid point. And I think that the issue is to create incentive, right? And I think that you really did it. And I was a beneficiary of what you did. And I will never forget, ever forget, the opportunity that the LSMS group gave me to work with Hans Biswanger. And I'm mentioning this today because today is the HIV Day, and Hans has contributed a lot, not only to create it, but also to generate demand at the World Bank to finance projects for bringing drugs against HIV in developing countries. How do you generate the appetite for data? How do you generate the appetite for science, for evidence, for research? By putting people working together and by mixing people, by providing the data and put people with knowledge, producing knowledge and sharing knowledge with people who don't know each other and people who can work together. And how this is happening. Think of me and Hans working together, and you remember us while we were working together. He He had like 2,000 of ideas, but he didn't have the mean to use the data to show what he had in mind. And me at the time, because that time unfortunately passed, I was the one who know how to use the data. And by working together, putting the same intents to produce something for the international development community, which were the ultimate beneficiaries of the data that you produced at the time, we were able to contribute to the increase of the knowledge of data use and policies indication that were out of those papers. So I think that this is the who, this is the what. You need incentive. You need people who believe in what you're doing and trying to export those ideas in the countries where we operate. Over.
Paul, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so I think how do you build the bridge? I think Jeto's metaphor of the infrastructure on either sides of the bridge make a lot of sense. And we saw the difference in the 50 by 2030 in Uganda and Ethiopia, particularly because they have a long history of what Jeto was describing, the LSMS. There were more proposals that came from the country for research from local researchers because of the good work that the LSMS team has done. So on one side of the bridge, you do have more infrastructure on the supply side, right? On the data generation of local researchers trying to do relevant research for policymakers. I think the challenge is, especially for economists and data people like all of us, is to think on the other side of the bridge, is how do you facilitate the policymakers' interest, what the role of translators might be in there. And I do think the LSMS team over the last decade and longer have done that. I mean, they've been trying to push for that. I don't think we're far enough yet, but it's a kind of a natural evolution for what's already been done to build further. And I think the 50 by 2030 can play that role in trying to figure out how do we expand data use and how do we build the infrastructure on the the demand side of the bridge. And as Jeto rightly noted, if there's no infrastructure on that side, then nothing happens. It's a bridge to nowhere. And so building it on both sides is quite important, and 50 by 2030 should work to do that.
Can I jump in? Just a couple of thoughts on the who. So just first, let me put in a plug for a paper I just published. So I'll just do a little advertising on the European Review of Ag Economy, so which is exactly on that. And if you go through the paper, it kind of lays out a role for everyone. So I think the pitch there is to create a bit of a framework for who should do what and at what level. I mean, that's also another important thing, because there are things that can be done best at the global level, things that they're done at the regional, needs to be done at the regional level, things that be done at national, local, or individual level. I mean, I think that's a kind of a bit of a framework to think of who should be doing what. And of course, there's a role for international organizations, there's a role for donors, there's a role for individual researchers to make sure that a lot of these actions are put in place, and the enabling environment, going back to this infrastructure on both sides. So the enabling environment, it's created. So I'm not going to go through the list. If anybody's interested, the list is it's in there, it's in the paper. So, but I'm glad that you bring it up. So at least I can do a little bit of advertising. But the pitch here is, so ultimately what we need, and this is not my pitch, is that WDR. What we need is a social contract for data and for research. So start thinking on how we move from private goods, like it could be a research paper, to a public good, how we create externalities from that private good, and how institutions like ours can incentivize, can facilitate, can foster that amplifying effect of the private good, which is your research paper. But one thing that is on the who. The other day, actually, I had lunch with the secretary of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, right? So you think like, I mean, why you need a coalition of finance ministers for climate action? it's because that's where the wallet is. So if at the end of the day, if you really want to move your agenda, so you need to talk to the Minister of Minister of Finance, and this is a kind of an important player in all of this discussion of who needs to be involved and how you build the bridge. On your question on the role of the 50 by 30. So first of all, I mean, again, apologies if I go back to the metaphor of the building the bridge. So the bridge has the columns, has the span, and it has the foundation. The foundation, the way, I mean, sorry for pitching for my own, the foundation is the data, which is the invisible part. And this is what 50 by 30 certainly can and should contribute to build the foundation of this bridge, which is the data which are relevant to build the columns on top of it and to build the rest of the bridge. So, and that's certainly something that 50 by 30 can do. But also another thing, which is something we've been thinking of in the LSMS as well, actually we've been doing in the LSMS, is not only promote the use of data once they are produced, so kind of exposed, like similar to this conference. So there are data, so let's put it out there, let's improve access to the data. But also, how do we involve researchers ex ante at the design stage? How do we influence the design of instrument? Not only 50 by 30, LSMS, other initiative, other research project, to make sure that the data that they're being produced are most relevant for not only for one, but for multiple purposes, for multiple uses. So, and this is again the idea of the WDR of data use and reuse. So ultimately, we want to make sure that the data that we produce, the research that we produce, are the basis for multiple uses, for multiple purposes. Over.
Okay, does anybody else want to add to that, to what been said so far on who, what, and a little bit of how? If not, I'm going to deviate a second, and I see there's a question that's already come up that could be relevant at this stage to ask. So I will ask this question from the participants. And the question is, don't you think that we need to explore avenues of creating demand for evidence-based policy derivation from government policymakers in developing countries? How come there is some semblance of such practice by USA and Western Europe policymakers?
Yeah.
Somebody want to address that one?
Sure, I can try to start. Well, one is we should be very clear that COVID has showed us that evidence is not always used in decision making and what people think, as we see as the divisions in the United States and elsewhere. There's lots of evidence and we're arguing over it. So no matter where you are, scientific evidence might not be used. I think though part of it is, and I think this is partly getting to what Jetta was saying, in Western countries, in the US, Europe, there's lots of data that's regularly available. And it's timely. There was another question that wrote about the policy time on how long it takes. So there's access to this massive amount of data. You know, you look in the United States, you have a census every 10 years. You have the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You have USDA collecting data. So there's this wealth of information that's available both to researchers inside and outside of government, and it's timely. So when a question comes up, someone can go and look at that data. That's not present at the current time in a lot of the countries in 50 by 2030. And building that basic infrastructure is critical. When you are regularly doing it, then you can be much more timely in answering questions. The problem is that if a policymaker asks a question and you right now and you want to have data for that, it can take months and months to answer that question. By then the question's no longer relevant, or they've moved on, or they're frustrated. And so really what Jetto is describing, I think, is what we need to have, is we need those pillars of the bridge and make sure that it's all there. And then of course, all the other things that have to go along with it. So I think part of the way to ensure that it's being used in developing countries and becomes more used is to ensure that you have regular data collection, that it's at the hands, that you have government agencies that spend a certain amount of time analyzing that data. You know, in the United States Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service, a certain percent of every economist's time is answering questions from Congress and the government. So they are referred to, they analyze the data that exists, and then they send back you know, briefs on what it says, so they're able to have it. And you can't build that without the underlying pillars of data being available.
If I can
Sarah,
add a couple of words
Right.
to what Paul was saying, I think actually I was thinking along the same lines, and that there is a clearly, as Paul was saying, kind of this issue that a politician's time frame is now, a researcher time frame is mañana. So it takes a lot longer to produce the data. But at the same time, what we have seen, and there I have a little bit of different spin from Paul on the COVID. For COVID, to me, it actually helped dramatically, like to reframe the whole conversation about data, about research, about the user research. Of course, as you said, research is misused. The research is it's embellished, and the user for their own purpose. But at the same time, COVID what showed us, for example, is that and for politicians became important to show that maybe not in the U.S. In other places that the availability of the data, availability of research, availability of evidence became important. But also the reason why it worked is because the researchers responded in tune. So we were not any longer thinking about mañana. We were thinking about today. What can we give today? So how do we move, for example, from complex designs, survey design to high frequency phone surveys to be able to provide that information today, I mean, almost in real time. So I think, and again, it goes to Paul's point, it goes both ways. It goes both ways in the sense that policymakers need to come halfway in this bridge once it's built, but also for researchers to change the way we work in order to be more responsive to certain needs. And this one kind of raises also a whole number of issues on kind of the purist approach to research. So like, I mean, how it kind of goes to the issue of a publication. In order to publish, you need to have something which is rigorous, solid. A politician perhaps wants something a little bit quicker and dirtier. So what is the right threshold? I mean, what is the right compromise? What's the right trade-off? That's always been kind of the challenge. I'll stop there.
Sarah, you had your hand up before. Did you want to add to this?
Yes, and I like the way the conversation is moving very much. Yes, two things I would like to say. Fully support what Paul and Jero have said, and I would like to even add them. I think that the COVID really brought a structural break and forced researcher and econometrician and the purist to be a little bit more practical and try, and they really had to see what the policymakers were facing, because we all found ourselves in a moment of strong stress and the need to give results and very quick. So I think this was, on the contrary, maybe only one of the positive, if we can call it like that, consequences of the COVID. So but you have to also sometimes remember why. And I think that if we want to look a little bit at the historical perspective of economics, and you look at the 50s, economic thought in the 50s, it was very much based on theories. Then at some point, there was a need also to do some applied work. And that's when all the papers using macro level data started to be published in order to publish applied research papers and not only theory, to be able to prove our theory with the data. But then a new generation of economists appear, those who really believe that you not only need macro level data, but you also need micro level data. And that's when a huge number of data sets would be produced. And also as a result of the high food price crisis of 2008, that's really when all these data were started to be produced. But then we have to think of a structural break, like the COVID. We have a huge amount of people, and that is what this initiative should do. This initiative should be a structural break. Force the people to stop and think how they use the data and how the data can be put at the service of the policymaker in order to take quick decisions to change the status quo. At least this is what I saw in Italy. I didn't travel as most of you during that time, but I saw the strong effort that at least with the media and the communication channel, it was done to communicate data on COVID. I saw how the website of John Hopkins that was producing, at least the best one producing data on COVID, was also spread all around the world, and how researchers were using also those data to try to communicate to the audience, to the people of the countries, what was happening real time on COVID. Over.
Okay, I think I'll take a breath of fresh air now and do this poll with the audience, just of some of your thoughts about what needs to be done, what needs to be addressed in order for the to bridge the research to policy gap. Just listen to a fun little exercise to just get a feeling of what the audience thinks about this topic, of what needs to be done. So I'll leave you just for a minute to think about this, and then we'll see what people think.
Sorry, Steve, but I would like to thank Mukesh. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Mukesh. Very interesting and nice comments in the chat about the British wanted to create a demand for tea in India. I think it's very nice.
I'll bring that up. I'll bring that up.
Okay,
after.
thank you. I mean, it's just because sometimes in Zoom you cannot acknowledge enough the people that are participating, and this is a very nice comment that he put.
Yes, I saw that, and I will. I'll bring that up after when we finish the next round. How are we doing with the poll?
We have about 60% have responded so far.
Okay, 10 more seconds, and then we'll just close it. Things are going in an interesting way, so, and we only have limited time, so let's move on. Okay, you want to close the poll, and let's see what came up. Okay, well, okay. So many people took the easy way out, which is to say all these things, everything needs to be done. But other than that, I think the point that was made several times is the increasing collaboration, or for one mechanism or another. Paul already raised the need for more interaction between researchers and decision makers, and this one sort of emerged as the most important one. And the least important is to produce more and more data. That was more there for, in fact, we were hoping there wouldn't be so many answers on that one, because it doesn't help to produce more if we're having trouble using what we have. Unless, of course, the more data is something that was missing that is addressing a need. Okay, so let's move on to, I think we've hit the how enough. So I think I'll skip the how for the rest of the how. But a little bit on the where, in the sense that are some countries further along the road in building a bridge, and if so, are there any models that we can look at for people who are doing this right that could set the example for other countries?
Okay, let me give it a go if nobody wants to. So I think when you ask the question on the where, I'm thinking about two different levels. Where in terms of countries, but also where in terms of institutions and people within countries. So where do we build those that capacity? Where do we build those bridges? And to me, based on past experiences in terms of targeting countries, so the key word, if I can summarize in one word, is champion. Where you have a champion for what you're trying to do, and this is the countries where things actually got traction. So whatever you were proposing, whatever you were working on, I think what it needs is the presence of a champion in government, and ideally somebody high up that can make your case. But also in terms of targeting countries, I think to me, and again, I go back to the experience of the LSMS ISA. So I think not to underestimate the value of the demonstration effect. So therefore, you want to pick countries, you want to focus on country, you want to build these bridges and show the impact of building those bridges and make this connection work in countries where you have at least initially a high likelihood to succeed, where there is already a minimal level of capacity. Then based on that, based on what you're showing those countries, based on the demonstration effect, then you start to kind of build in other countries. So in terms of sequencing, I think it is important to kind of sequence in this order, in my opinion. And other things that have worked in countries, I mean, without the naming specific countries or where we see this thing working better than in others. So it's when you embed people in line ministry, you embed the researchers in the work, in the daily work on line ministries. When you have a strong local think tank, a research center with clear connection with policymakers. So, and I can list a number of countries where that is certainly the case. So there are many countries where you see some or all of the above. And I think those are kind of a good leverages that can be used to kind of make sure that, again, the bridge is built. One thing that we always struggle, because we work mostly with national statistical offices, and the national statistical office always ask for build the analytical capacity, build the analytical capacity, build the analytical capacity. So now the question is, again, thinking about where you build this analytical capacity, what is the right level of capacity that you want to build, of research capacity that you want to build in a statistical office vis-a-vis in other institutions in the countries, or it should be more about facilitating this embedding or this relationship, institutional relationship within countries, which are often rather weak. So I think that's something that I think personally we're still struggling with a clear answer. Over.
And I just completely agree with Jetto about the where is clearly within countries. And I was about to raise the last point that he just made, that part of the struggle is not in the government, but how do you build kind of the think tanks, the strength of the universities, all of that have a natural ability to work with government, and what are the roles that you, or what type of thing can you do to help in that regard. So I really think the in-country, from the champion to the ministry and then to out in the academic community, is the key to where you want to help build this kind of capacity.
Yes, can I compliment Steve with last few comments?
Absolutely.
Yes, totally aligned. It's beautiful to have a conversation with people you agree, like 99.9%. So let me try to give a little contribution. What is this little contribution? And sorry if I'm mentioning again the first ever Global Data Use Conference, but I think that, you need a place that has reputation where everybody wants to be in order to disseminate what you're doing. And let me take the comparison, not that I want to compare the first ever Global Data Use Conference with the CSAE, the Center of Studies on African Economies. And I'm using this example because most of the data that will be produced and used in the 50 by 2030 are also related to lower and middle income countries and in sub-Saharan African countries. What is, at the end of the day, the CSAE? It's a center that has reputation, created and then continued by people who have reputation, that made this strong willingness to participate to the annual conference like one of the crucial factors and pushing factors for researchers to write papers of high academic standard on African economies to present at this conference. This is what the CSAE has done over time by putting together not only scholars from African countries, but attracting the best of the best of the best academics all around the world. And it has been attended, including by people that we have here in the list of participants that are listed here in the Zoom, but also by us, by Paul, by Jero, and by myself. So I think that we need to create this excellence, this reputational place, where you build and you create reputation and really push factors for policymakers and for researchers to be and to continue to create something even stronger than what was done. Over.
Okay, that was very nice, Sarah, because you addressed the how and the where at the same time. I will move on so let's go to the questions part, and I can start with Mukesh's comment, which is also a question there. And what Mukesh wrote was that when British wanted to create demand for tea in India, they not only gave it free to taste, but they also gave 2 cookies with it. Today, there is a huge demand for tea in the country. How can we incentivize people to use a product, or to use data in this case, with a view to giving them first a taste of it? Would somebody like to take that one?
I think Jero should start giving cookies whenever he does the LSMS survey, and then maybe that would incentivize. But I think it's a really good point. And what are the incentives? And I'm not sure we know completely. There are surveys that have been done of policymakers. There was listening to a leaders survey, and they seem to want data. So the evidence does suggest that they want evidence. And so part of it is a matter of making it available, but clearly you do want to try to create a broader incentive to do that. And part of it is showing that that by providing evidence, you can do a better job in your policymaking, so that it's in their interest to do so. There was a study recently published about the Millennium Development Goals, which found that in countries in which the Millennium Development Goals were more carefully measured, they made more progress towards those Millennium Development Goals. So there is some evidence out there, but I do think we probably need to, keep pushing to show and to create an incentive that they would do a better job in terms of making policy. But obviously we need to think creatively about how to do this kind of thing.
So on Paul's suggestion to distribute cookies for like perhaps if I can add some nicotine in it or some addictive substance that to hook people. I mean, I think that's what, again, joking aside, I think it's more about going back to the demonstration effect. You need to show how useful these data are. And we need to start thinking about how we value and quantify the benefit. We always talk about cost. So we always say a survey is too expensive, but we never talk about what are the benefits of a survey. But because it's really easy to quantify cost because it's right there in the budget. But we're not really good at quantifying the benefits. And so I think the first step in increasing demand, short of distributing addictive substances, is like you just have to show the value of the data, show the value of research, but also, and this is something that we're doing currently at the bank, colleagues of mine actively work on it, how we make data more discoverable. I mean, just the discoverability of data, what we were talking before about access to data. But now, given the flood of information that we have now we're not only talking about a survey of 5,000 households, we're talking about terabyte of data being produced every day. So how do you discover it? How you make it easier to access those data, to use those data? And that's where, again, the challenge there is trying to understand, also to trying to figure out what is the right level of investment? What is the right? Because one of the challenges I always had some of the criticism of the LSMS has been that the data are not accessible by third graders. So, but should they be accessible by third graders? Should it be used by third graders? So it's like, what is the, how far do you push? So these are complex data sets, right? So you need to make it easier, but at the same time, they're not necessarily for everyone, but they're different product. You can differentiate product in terms of the kind of the parts of the data, parts of the research that they can be more accessible to different groups. So also this issue of differentiation across users. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Sarah, you want to add something to this?
Also, but I have a less eloquent consideration compared to Paul and Gero, and an answer, a practical example of addictive addiction to address the interesting issue raised by Gero. And I would like to apologize to participants like Aberash and Vivian Filippi that made very complicated question. I'm going to answer in a much easier way. So what is the addiction in a much simpler way? You need to think of an addiction for producer, user, or even if you want to mix them, because at the end they're mixed, for the different agent. So think of researcher and policymakers. What's the addiction of researcher? To publish on peer-reviewed journal. How can you publish on peer-reviewed journal? Having data that are produced using the best methods, the best techniques, the rigor that comes from all the state of the art for the topics that are, for the questions that are raised in the survey. And how do you, what is the addiction of policymaker? Is the success, is the audience. So how do you, and think of the COVID, at least in Italy, I can tell you the example of Italy. I mean, the people who were called the most in TV shows, in the media and social media, were those that were able to use the data produced on the COVID and to communicate them to the audience, to increase their tweets or their, I don't know, because unfortunately, I'm not too much into the social media world. So this is the addiction. It's peer-reviewed journal for researcher, and it's the audience and the reputation, and it's the success for the policymaker. And somehow you need to combine those two worlds and to fuel those two worlds at the same time. Over.
Okay, thank you. We have to wrap up soon. I just mention a couple of comments that are coming through the chat. One person talked about the importance of creating a permanent coordination structure and a platform between policymakers and researchers. And I think that is exactly a point you made, Sarah, and that's what the 50 by 2030 initiative offers and as well. There is investment going into this area. Data producers should hear what the policymakers need and align their work to the needs of policymakers. Data should be operable and metadata should be attached. And then let's see, we have a few, let's see, there's another question here. Let's see if we can, I'm just going through the questions a second. There's so many of them. This is another one from Mukesh, which is interesting. How do the panelists see the idea of creating a community of data users to work as a catalyst in the data? This is like the champion idea, to work as a catalyst in the data ecosystem to promote the data demand. Anyway, seems like a nice question to end on. So I open the floor on that one, on a community of data users, champions.
Sure, I'll jump in. There's actually a few people that have said this about community, something like that. A couple of years ago, I did some work on cash transfers in Africa in 8 different countries, and we put together a book with Oxford University Press called From Evidence to Action. And in effect, what it was saying was what the policy effects of all the randomized control trials on cash transfers. The interesting thing that we found out is the actual complicated, randomized control trials and the results we got there had almost no influence on what policies were put into place. What really had an influence was the questions that policymakers had that the researchers answered on the fly. So there are questions about targeting, who should receive the cash transfers, and the researchers wouldn't publish a paper on this. They would just do the analysis and provide it to government. There was questions on how big the cash transfers should be. Again, quickly done and given to government. There were questions on the costs and benefits of all this the government wanted, and the same thing happened. So the availability of the researchers over this 3-year period, because they were constantly working on these randomized control trials, allowed policymakers to ask immediate questions. So basically a community was created around this particular area. And I think that is ultimately what needs to happen. And it has to be with people that are located there and there all the time. So local researchers, and whether that's formalized through a platform or more informal network of researchers that are using the kind of data coming out might not matter as much as the fact that it exists. And that to me is key, is that you have the quick access to researchers that already know the data and know what it can do. And that's what we should be striving for in the long run, is creating that local infrastructure to do this kind of work, and a local community that is vested in using the data to provide policy relevant evidence.
Okay, I think we have like a minute left, so maybe the other 2 panelists would like
30,
to add on this.
30 seconds. 30
Yes.
seconds. Just on this point. So based on the LSMS experience, which kind of also addresses the question Mukesh asked, but also Vivian Filippi is asking, which is, in the case of the LSMS, we do have a data user group that participate in the actual design of the survey. So people from aligned ministries, people from think tanks, researchers, academics. And this is the point I was trying to make at the beginning. It's if you want to create data which are fit for purpose, and Vivian said that often a policymaker find the data that they're available not fit for purpose. In order to create this data with a fit for purpose, a fit for use. So you need to think ex ante at the design stage. What are the policy question that you need to answer? What is the priority questions that you need to address? And this is done at the design stage by involving users at the beginning. But also the point I was trying to make is like how you design data systems which are fit for multiple purpose, not just for the purpose of the individual researcher, but they can serve multiple purposes. You can do, we tend to emphasize more at the ex post. So we have the data, what can we use? And then therefore we try to rely on econometric techniques, on fancy econometrics to make it fit for purpose, to put the proverbial square peg into a round hole. But we can create round pegs, and this is done by involving data users and researchers at the design stage, which is what we do generally. But again, it's not done everywhere, and more needs to be done.
Okay, Sarah, the last 30 seconds are yours.
No, I'm not going to use, because Paul and Jero were already comprehensive, even more than that. I just want to say that I think that with this event, we don't realize that the community may be has already been created, or we at least we launched the idea of the community, and we hope that it will grow more and more in the future.
Okay, so as we've seen, we had this discussion about the bridge. In reality, a lot of things are happening, and maybe the bridge is a question of just putting the final pieces together to make it work, to make it fully effective. So thank you to our three guests, and it's been a very interesting discussion, and lots of food for thought. You can continue the discussion in the chat, thank you again, and we move on to the next program now. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.